Welcome to the Mind Money Spectrum podcast, where your hosts, Aaron Agti and Trishul Patel, go beyond traditional finance questions to help you explore how to use your money to achieve the freedom you want in life.
In this episode, Aaron and Trishul try to distinguish between happiness and well-being. They explore situations where clients had achieved their goals and attained their personal definition of success, but still felt worried or concerned. If angst is ever present and can't be resolved through rational decisions, but rather through emotional introspection, do you actually need to achieve your goals to be happy? Or can you simply choose to be happy? Is it even possible to be happy if you don't choose to be so? And now, onto our conversation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Agti. I'm a financial advisor in the Bay Area, and I'm here with Trishul Patel, a wealth manager on the East Coast. How are you doing today, Trishul?
I'm doing great.
Glad to hear it. In the past, we've talked about happiness and happiness research, and I want to go a little more in depth into kind of that definition. But for today, I want to kind of distinguish happiness from well-being. Some of the things that we've talked about, there are times both through research and our conversations that our advice would probably be in the line of pursuing greater well-being or greater fulfillment, but we can also acknowledge that sometimes the emotion of happiness does not actually go along with that. And so today we're going to try and explore that distinction between happiness and happiness research and well-being. And specifically, we're going to focus on financial well-being today. So, Trishul, my first question for you is just, what does financial well-being mean to you?
With financial well-being, what I think of is when an individual or family can cover not only their basics, food, water, shelter, but also have a good plan for the future. What that means is they probably want to cover their healthcare for today and the future, their housing for today and the future, education that may come up for today and the future. Those are probably the big ticket items. And they probably want to have a good plan in place for a comfortable retirement. In addition to that, for today, to be happy or to have a good amount of well-being from a financial standpoint, what that likely also means is have enough money to spend time with friends and family, to enjoy things like vacations, and to provide for not only necessary items, but things that you want. So I think all of that leads into the notion of what one would like to have with financial well-being.
I like that. And I probably would agree with that pretty consistently. It kind of, they cover the basics, plan for the future, and have enough to do the things that you still like. And one of my kind of distinctions here is that plan for the future part of it. I think that you and I have had great conversations on the importance of saving and how much you're saving. And one of the things I see with clients that is different from well-being is because the future is kind of so hard to predict, and just human beings have so much difficulty projecting their current situation into the future. Even if they're saving enough, and either they do the calculator themselves or I tell them, and so they kind of rationally know they're saving enough for those future goals and for those plans, it doesn't seem to necessarily improve their well-being. And it's kind of like they know it should, but they can't necessarily internalize that. And so I think there are differences between, so there's covering the basics, and that they can kind of feel. There is planning for the future, and even kind of like they consciously know they're on track. But I think there's an additional third element, and maybe this is kind of what you were referring to about kind of having the extra money to do the things they enjoy and spend time with friends and family. But I think there's this extra level of having the capacity to absorb shocks and unknown future variability, and kind of that uncertainty related to the future that helps put people at ease. And one of the things that I've seen both in personal situations and backed by research that I'd be curious to explore, I don't know if we'll have time today, but the idea of kind of large cash balances, where from a math perspective and in kind of just strict financial planning, we only keep enough in cash for like an emergency, maybe an opportunity, but the rest we want to invest in a diversified portfolio. The asset allocation is going to achieve a rate of return that's in line with our goals, because any excess cash just ends up being a drag on the portfolio. But I have seen clients that they have saved enough, they built up enough wealth, and they just want to keep an extra large cash amount. And it's on a scale of 3 to 5 times how much I recommend that they have. That they'll have something like, I'll recommend having 6 to 12 months worth of expenses in an emergency position, and they're keeping like 3 years worth of expenses in cash. And they end up seeming more comfortable and happier. And so I want to kind of see if we could explore this idea that covering the basics is kind of the first key. And that goes back to our conversation about the happiness correlates with income up to about 75,000. That's the covering the basics. And then planning for the futures goes back to our conversation about kind of savings rates and making sure that they're saving enough. But I think there's one other element that I have seen people who both make enough money to cover the basics and they're saving enough for their future goals, but they don't necessarily feel like they have that financial well-being. And I can't always figure out why. So I'm curious, like, have you seen that with your clients?
I've noticed similar things, yes. And I think it relates to a few things. One, somebody told me this a long time ago, and it kind of stuck with me. There's one underlying emotion that kind of treads underneath all other human emotions. It's the notion that whatever you're feeling, there's always something underneath it. And what we like to call it is angst. So whether you're sad, there's a certain amount of angst, of course, but it's also there if you're happy. It's this uncomfortable feeling that something bad may happen. Whether you're in love, or you've just broken up, or you've won the lottery, or you've lost a leg, there's this feeling that something bad could always happen. And part of that is true, but part of that is what kind of makes us human as well, the notion that we like to anticipate things, but we also like to worry at the same time. So that ties into the notion that you express with some of your clients that you've seen, and what I've also seen, where people feel more comfortable with that cash cushion, sometimes beyond what is rationally necessary. That might be a part of it. Another part of it is the notion that when something is invested, you feel like you have less control over it. It may be as liquid as, the S&P, where you can get your money back by just clicking a few buttons. but still you feel like it's at risk, so it's farther away than you would feel comfortable with. The third thing that other people may be thinking with respect to having large cash balances is perhaps this notion that they feel they're waiting for a good opportunity. Meaning, today, we all know that the markets are at an all-time high. So even if people know they shouldn't be timing the market, I feel like they may be this slight underpinning that, yeah, but if I just wait a bit longer and things start to crumble, I may get a better shot at entering at a more favorable point. These three things, this notion of underlying angst, this notion of uncertainty that I mentioned, this notion of wanting to plan for the future, but also wanting to time a little more opportunistically, all tie into the notion of saving more in cash than one would probably deem sensible.
So when you started describing that angst and that kind of looking out to the future, it reminded me of some of the research on evolutionary psychology. This is kind of like the next stage of behavioral psychology, is just how are human beings' brains wired. And you get things like the early humans that were always looking for tigers in the grass are the ones who survived, and the ones who thought they were fine and they were happy in their current position didn't see the tiger in the grass. And so like you can kind of project that forward. Like I kind of see that, like if human beings are always on the lookout for that future uncertainty, maybe there is that kind of underlying angst. And you get other things like, why are human beings tribal? It's because in the early stage of humanity, if you didn't go along with the tribe, you got kicked out and you died because you couldn't survive by yourself. And so it's really interesting kind of seeing how the human brain is wired for certain behaviors. And I like that. I kind of like that idea that there's that underlying angst even when you're happy. And this is now more of a guess, but or more anecdotal based on observation rather than research based. I think there's a difference of the clients who make enough money, they're saving enough for future goals because we've done a plan and they're confident in that. They even have a decent cash position to cover those emergencies. And they're kind of choosing to be happy, and versus the clients who are making enough money to meet their goals, saving up for the future, have a decent cash position, but are kind of choosing to stay worried. And I don't know if this is behavioral. I think probably part of it is. I think part of it is actually from environment, especially through their developmental stage. Could be generational. It's like just why you see generations who went through the Great Depression are keeping money in cash, and or even just literal bills in a safe in their house, because they tend to have these kind of fears and worries even when they're happy, versus others who kind of grew up in an environment where it encouraged savings so that when those emergencies happened, there was always that extra savings. So they never worried about the emergencies. And I try to help clients think about their current situation, and not just kind of what they're doing from a day-to-day basis, but kind of what do they want to do and how do they want to feel on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. And we have to get those first three things taken care of. That kind of, again, making enough money to meet your goal or to meet your liabilities, cover the basics, making sure that you're on track for your future goals, and that you still have a little extra reserve. Like that takes care of the rational side. But and that really is why the financial aspect of well-being is kind of foundational to all the others, that you have to establish that you consciously and rationally know that you're okay. But even after that, you get the kind of studies on difference between people who feel like investors for people who feel like savers. That's the way that they are. And that's why you see people, even if they understand all the numbers and they're intelligent enough to follow everything, they just don't like investing in stocks. It's just the swings are too big for them. And you get people all the way on the other extreme of they'll be invested 100% in stocks, and maybe even just a few random stocks, kind of like we talked about, the people who want to buy stocks for fun, and they're taking on way too much risk that they don't even realize. But that doesn't bother them. And so I think the first step is just at least having these conversations and forcing them to be a little more introspective and getting them to realize for themselves how do they feel certain ways and why do they feel that. And I'm worried I'm kind of going too far off, but I'm curious, have you thought about this, that the idea that you have to be a little more introspective and think about your emotions or happiness or well-being in the moment?
When you're dealing with clients, there are a few ways that a conversation like this can go. Usually it begins with a overview of their current situation. So if you look at a client and they have enough money and they don't even need to invest efficiently and they'll still be okay, then maybe this is all a non-issue. But there's certainly a good subset of people who you look at how they're invested, and as you said, either they're way too conservative, meaning they'll never meet their goals based upon how they're currently allocated. They're all in cash, but they need some sort of growth if they want to, retire before they're 70. Or on the flip side, you meet a client that, like you said, is probably taking on way too much risk than is necessary. They would be perfectly comfortable gearing down their portfolio and still meeting a healthy retirement age. So I think in those situations, for those subset of individuals, there probably is room for some education as it relates to what could be done to nudge the needle in a direction that's probably more sensible for their long-term well-being. So that's on the investing side, but there also needs to be a good connection on the earning side, so that there's two sides to this equation. Once you have the money, what to do with it, but also with financial well-being, there's the notion of, well, how do you get the money in the first place? And that ties into, of course, happiness, because you want to do something that you enjoy, but not everything you necessarily enjoy will be profitable or give you an income. So the way one might think about this is there's a few dimensions you want to consider. You want to think about the things that you love. What are you passionate about in life? What's important to you? What gets you up in the day? But you also want to think about what you can get paid for, because not necessarily everything that you love will lead to something that somebody is willing to pay for. And you also need to think about what you're actually good at. So this is a completely separate dimension, meaning just because you love something doesn't mean somebody would pay for it, and it might not even mean you're good at it. And the last thing you need to think about is what does the world actually need? The world's evolving and things are changing pretty quickly. So you want to consider these four things if you're coming up with a good plan for earning money as part of your financial well-being strategy. And ideally, if you can come up with something that meets maybe not all of these four dimensions, but most of them, or work towards most of them, I think you'll be in a much better shape to have financial well-being.
I like that. I definitely think we want to explore those in the future. You and I've kind of talked about how there are different domains of well-being and how they're categorized. So maybe we can categorize those later. But when we go back to looking at financial well-being specifically, I do think of a couple client cases where they tended to be kind of scared and conservative. So they were saving incredibly well. They are great savers. And so by the time they got ready to look for retirement, is kind of situation was like, you probably could have retired 5 years ago, but you just didn't do the math and you didn't realize it. So you're so far ahead of what your lifestyle requires that you have an incredible capacity to absorb any kind of risks. And telling them they were financially independent now, and even telling them they had saved so well that they could kind of do whatever they wanted within their lifestyle, it didn't change them at all. And they didn't internalize what I was telling them, that you are financially independent now. You can actually spend an extra $10,000 or $20,000 per year on vacation, and it won't materially impact your long-term financial planning success. It actually took a few months down the road when the husband was thinking, well, I've kind of always wanted to surprise my wife with a new car for her birthday. And her birthday is still months away. And he's kind of like, can I do this? And we're trying to like, we were like, yes, you could easily do that probably several times in your lifetime. You could, or spend 2 or 3 times the amount on the car and still be fine. And it was when he found that emotional kind of use for the money that he started to really understand, oh, I actually am in great shape. And it was when he kind of really understood what he could do with it, he no longer felt scared. And I'm almost wondering, is there this difference between trying to think about the feelings related to financial well-being, or do you would be better off to just kind of rationally and consciously think about the financial well-being, but then almost like distract your own brain and focus on the feelings of all the other things, the work that you do and the value you find in that, spending time with friends and family, experiences and memories. So it's like, do you think that it's better to try and feel safe when it comes to money, or maybe acknowledge the angst will always be there, so choose to spend your mental energy and thoughts on how you feel around the other things that make up well-being?
I like how you said that. Basically, it's a matter of kind of choosing your battles, right? Not everybody will respond the same way to statistics and information and what makes sense objectively. Because at the end of the day, how we live our lives has a lot to do with how we feel emotionally. For example, When you wash your dishes, do you pre-wash everything and then put it in the dishwasher? Are you one of those people, Aaron?
So, in just full disclosure, and this is related to this. My wife does all the dishes, but I do all the laundry because my wife hates folding laundry, whereas I will wash all the clothes, and then while watching football on Sundays, I will stand there for hours folding laundry with no problem. And so it's kind of, I I am pretty sure we kind of, the things that need to be soaked, we soak, and she rinses things off before putting the dishwasher. But that's so like, I need you to ask me a laundry question next time, not a dishwashing question. But anyways, go on. So
you
should
can
I
guess
be
where I'm
pre-washing?
going this? Yeah, you can guess where I'm going with this. Basically, in the olden days, dishwashers just weren't that good. So you had to pretty much wash the dish and then put it in the dishwasher and then hope that it makes it sparkle a bit more. So what you might see with a lot of people is they still do that. Not only do they scrape off the plate, but they rinse it with some soap and water even, and then load up the dishwasher and then click the button to start it. It actually turns out that a dishwasher is more sensible economically and environmentally than hand washing dishes these days. But that only works if you don't already wash the dish first before you put it in the dishwasher. And this has been true for at least a few decades now. I mean, a decade or two at least with modern dishwashers. But you'll still see people who wash their dishes first and then load up the dishwasher and then turn it on. Here's another one. Do you let your food cool down completely before you put it in the refrigerator?
No.
Right. So in the past, something that was common is refrigerators weren't that powerful. So if you put something hot in there, it would just over capacitate the refrigerator and it wouldn't cool down quickly enough.
Oh,
So
interesting.
a common thing that people used to do is they would let it cool on the counter and then you put it in the refrigerator. Unfortunately, what that does is it lets food stay out longer than it should be.
Mm.
And it leads to an increase in chances of the food going bad. But to this day, you'll still see people doing something like this. Even though it's been at least a generation since a modern refrigerator has been able to handle a hot item and been able to cool it down effectively. There are things like this where things have changed. For example, in our lifetime, we haven't seen a banking crisis where, a currency has collapsed in our society in the US. We haven't seen the turbulence of bank runs taking over as we had in the Great Depression. We've certainly seen some turbulence in the markets, but even if you had invested at the worst time of the dot-com bubble or in 2008, if you had invested in 2008 at the worst time and kept your money in there till today, you would have been just fine. For example, let's say you had put your money in the day after Lehman collapsed. So this is probably the worst time to invest. So there was an article about a year or so showing how much that money would have grown if you had just left it in there till today. You would have had a 10% compounded annual return by investing at the worst time possible in the stock market. So it's just something to probably let people understand that, yes, it's a risky thing, but maybe things have changed a bit. Although what we all probably have told ourselves is that, well, just because the stock market has been okay for the last 100 or so years doesn't mean it'll continue to do so. And maybe the same thing is true for having cash, and that's probably also why gold is so popular during times of uncertainty. I guess my small rebuttal to that is, if the economy collapses and you're relying on gold, are we even sure gold is going to help you if we're throwing sticks and stones at each other for survival and picking berries to live it day to day?
I also tend to advise against gold. I will just kind of compare it to stocks. And actually, the same reason I recommended against cryptocurrencies was that gold doesn't generate any money. You're kind of hoping it's a store of value that someone will pay more for it in the future than you paid for it now. That you're hoping it's a store of value. A company that's generating revenues is providing a service or product that people want and are willing to give their money for that product or service. And so it can actually grow and generate dividends. If you're a part owner of a company, that's what stock holders are, then you get some benefit from that revenue. So there's the service or product or value that the company is providing. People will pay their money for that, and you're getting exchange for that. With gold, you're just hoping it goes up. There's no kind of fundamental economic reason for gold to go up.
I think I also take issue with the notion of gold being an investment. In my mind, you can save money in gold, but investing it for future gain does not quite make sense to me for the same reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of like other examples of that, like what has changed in the last 10, 20 years. And when you're talking about if you invested in the worst possible time when Lehman Brothers collapsed, and you'd still be up 10% annualized by now, that sounds similar to what I tell my clients when they ask kind of about what are my thoughts on the stock market. And first of all, I don't look at the stock market every day. I might glance at it one to three times per month kind of thing, because nothing the stock market does this week is going to change any of the advice that I give to clients. And I will try and look at kind of some bigger picture valuations. Like there is some data that valuations can impact long-term returns in financial planning. So I'll try and keep track of that, but that's on like a 1 year trailing aspect. If anytime I look at stocks, anytime I go to Yahoo Finance, I'm always making sure to glance at the 1 year trailing of the S&P 500. I don't care what it did last day, last week, last month. I want a bigger picture number. And clients will ask, well, what do you think that's going to happen in the stock market? And I'm honest. It's like, I have no idea what's going to happen the next week, in the next month, probably not even the next year. Now, based on valuations, it's probably a better guess that stocks will underperform their long-term average over the next 5 to 10 years. And if their long-term average is 10%, and we're going to average 6 to 8% over the next 5 to 10 years, that feels reasonable to me. I also tell them I have no idea how that's going to happen. It could be a negative 30 crash that takes 9 years to get back up. It could be a positive 40% from here before a crash happens. It could also just be really slow, sluggish, moderate growth of 4 to 10% every year. Like, all of those are realistic possibilities in my mind. And I guess I try to help clients think rationally about finances the same way I do, that I choose to not care about the short-term stock market, that it's going to be random ups and downs. I choose to focus on long-term, and I've removed a lot of those feelings and emotions related to investing in stocks. I'm still invested 100% in stocks based on my age and time frame for everything in my retirement accounts. But I kind of don't care enough what it does in the short term that I don't even pay attention. And I think there's some ability there if clients can internalize that you can choose not to be upset about something.
I think that's possible. Like when it comes to stocks, one of the best advice that I've heard is if you're going to invest, put the money in the account, throw away the login information, forget about the statements, and pretend you don't own it, and then come back in 40 years and maybe think about it. It's probably the best thing you can do.
I don't think I could even do it 40 years. You know what it is? Here's the single biggest reason why I can't. I know that some point in the next 2 decades, I'm going to change my asset allocation to be a little more conservative. So I have to look, how much of my stocks am I selling to buy bonds? That's the only reason, though.
Well, yeah, maybe there'll be robots to do that for you in 20 years.
See, I think this is a great conversation for another podcast of like robo-advisors versus human advisors and what's the value of each over the next few decades. Because I think the robo-advisor does a great job. Okay. I was going to say, but they don't know when to change my asset allocation. But they actually do, because there's lifestyle and age-based funds that already exist that will adjust your asset allocation over time. So maybe I don't have to look at it.
Right. The robots are here to stay, Aaron. I don't think they're going away.
I agree, but I think that human empathy is also here to stay. And it's going to be the cyborgs that actually help clients most effectively.
Assuming that they don't have weapons themselves.
I was going to say, if AI can learn empathy, I think then, or you know what? It's possible that AI could learn to simulate empathy, and that's when things will get scary.
Possibly.
Okay, this is a fun conversation. We kind of went off the rails a little bit, but I think it was worth going down. So I do think next time we want to explore some of those other domains of well-being, and kind of once you've established your financial foundation and you have that financial well-being taken care of, then what should you be thinking about? What should you be focusing on?
Yeah, I like that as well. And what I'd also want to consider is the notion that financial well-being is actually getting harder for the average citizen. The notion that in the past, housing, healthcare, and education were affordable, but these are all important components to financial well-being, and they've actually risen at rates far higher than inflation. That might be something to consider as well. How feasible is financial well-being today and in the future if these things are so hard to obtain?
That's definitely a future conversation, because there's a lot of socioeconomic factors that are going to come into play, and there's definitely not a good solution, even if there is one.
It's certainly complicated, or it's certainly not easy, but I guess it's not supposed to be either.
Okay. Anything else you want to add today?
I think that's good, Aaron. I think this definitely opened a few cans of worms that we'll have to sift through.
Sounds good. Okay. Thank you very much, Trishul. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Good chatting with you. And thanks everybody for listening. And also, if you like what you heard today, do add us as a subscriber. Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of the Mind Money Spectrum podcast. Be sure to visit mindmoneyspectrum.com to access the entire library of episodes. Remember, it's not black and white, but the wide spectrum of gray area where you get to pursue the freedoms you want in life. Opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical as no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested in directly. Have a nice day.